From your ears to your heart, we bring the light of knowledge to illuminate your life. Ilmwaves.com, where we make ilm possible.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma la sahla illa ma ja'altahu sahla. Wa anta ya hayyu ya qayyum. Taj'alul hazna idha shi'ta sahla. I start off by praising Allah, Lord of the worlds, and I humbly ask Him to raise the rank of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam and protect his nation from that which he fears for it. Thereafter, brothers and sisters, insha'Allah ta'ala, we will continue with the lesson and the program that our brothers have established, insha'Allah, for this blessed month of Rabi al-Awwal. So this is the third lesson of these weekly special lessons that we are putting out weekly, and insha'Allah you are benefiting from it. And I encourage you to participate and to help us spread the khair by liking, by sharing, by donating, by telling others, insha'Allah. That is greatly appreciated. And I'd like to mention now, for those who are able to purchase a book that one of our brothers and teachers has authored, then let him purchase this book. This book is entitled No Writer's Block, and it is written by Ustad Nadir Muhammad, one of my closest friends and one of my dear brothers and childhood friends, mashallah. And he entitled this book No Writer's Block, and it's about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Originally it was some poetry that he authored about the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and then he added explanation, a commentary to it. And it's a very, truly an amazing book, a very magnificent and beautiful book that I even refer to, mashallah. Some of the things that I mentioned in these lessons are taken from there. So I encourage those who are able to purchase it to purchase it. Those who are living in different cities, and you talk to the people in Toronto, you'll be able to find someone who can help you to obtain this book, insha'Allah ta'ala. And with that being said, bi'idhnillah, we will start our lesson. And this lesson is a very beautiful and enjoyable lesson, insha'Allah. And it is about the miracles of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, about the miracles of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasallam. Now the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam had many miracles. The scholars of Islam said that he had over 3,000 miracles. Allahu Akbar, over 3,000. Now I ask you, brothers and sisters, how many miracles do you know of the Prophet? Off the top of your head, if you were to count how many miracles you know from the Prophet ﷺ, which number would you reach? Take into consideration that there were over 3,000. Over 3,000, how many do we know? 5, maybe 10 max? We should know more. And this is actually one of the reasons why we decided to do this topic, to educate our Muslim brothers and sisters about the many miracles that the Prophet ﷺ had. Not just the splitting of the moon and the other ones, the gushing of the water of Hudaybiyah. These are popular ones and they're very beautiful. But what about the other miracles that we do not hear that much? Like we mentioned, the scholar said he had over 3,000. Over 3,000, take that in, brothers and sisters. That's a lot of miracles, and we do not know a fraction of that, subhanallah. You know, you could sit down with someone and just talk to them about these miracles, and you will find that they are attracted to it, mashallah. It's an opportunity for you to give da'wah to them. Even the children, if you're giving a class to a children, you mention the miracles of the Prophet, you find that they are attracted and they are inclined, and they increase in love to the Prophet ﷺ. Try it, really, if you have a little sibling, relative, or someone you teach at school, at an Islamic school, for example. Mention miracles to them and you'll find how their eyes light up to be like, wow, really? And this attracts them, mashallah, and increases the love in their hearts. And this also works with grown-ups and youth. If you talk to them about the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ, they are amazed, mashallah, because they love to learn about these miracles and they love to know more about the Prophet ﷺ. And it also has a positive effect on ourselves. You know, we don't learn this only for other people to benefit. We also try to benefit from these. So when we learn these miracles and these amazing things that occurred from the Prophet ﷺ, you'll find that your love increases towards him. And an amazing thing about these miracles is that it doesn't get old. Really, mashallah, they do not get old. No matter how many times you heard a particular miracle, every time you hear it again, it brings a feeling and a nice sensation to your heart. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And before we mention the many miracles of the Prophet ﷺ, and we have about over 30 miracles, mashallah, over 30 miracles that we want to mention to you, bi'idhnillah. So before we mention these miracles, it is important to understand what a miracle is. What is a miracle by definition? Because people out there, they use this word miracle loosely. So it's very important to understand what is a miracle Islamically. So we will touch on that, insha'Allah ta'ala. Know first and foremost that Allah, the Exalted, supported the Prophet ﷺ with numerous miracles. And it is these miracles that the people use to help them differentiate between a prophet and a fraud. And Allah, the Exalted, supported every prophet with a miracle. So every prophet had a miracle. Allah Ta'ala said in the Quran, لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلَنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ, which means surely we have sent our messengers with clear proofs, meaning miracles. And this is Surah Al-Hadid, verse 25. And a miracle by definition has to satisfy 4 conditions. Alright, so 4 conditions need to be satisfied for something to be classified as a miracle. First and foremost, it has to be an extraordinary, supernatural matter. That is something that usually does not occur. Alright, so the first condition, it has to be extraordinary. The second is that it occurs from someone who claims to be a prophet. The third is that it has to be in favor of the person claiming prophethood. That means that it must show and prove the truthfulness of that individual who claims to be a prophet. And the fourth condition is that no one should be able to challenge and discredit that extraordinary matter by performing a similar act. The first condition is very straightforward. A miracle must be something that is definitely extraordinary. So if it's something that is ordinary among the people, then it obviously does not satisfy condition and hence is not a miracle. However, when we say that it must be extraordinary, this does not simply mean that it is strange, rare, or improbable, but rather it must be supernatural, something that defies nature or natural occurrences. Some people are able to pull large, heavy buses, but this is not a miracle, Allahu Akbar. And some people happen to share the same birthday as their parents, but this is not a miracle either. I actually know a family, they have 2 daughters, and both of their daughters were born on the same day, mashallah. Now what are the chances of 2 children having the same birthday? And they're not twins, meaning they were born different years, but they were born on the same day. Now this is not a miracle, this is something strange and weird, mashallah. May Allah bless them, but this is not a miracle. Yes, these things may be considered strange, rare, or improbable, but this is not enough to be considered extraordinary or supernatural. And a great example of something extraordinary is what occurred to Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam after he silenced Nimrud, the tyrant. So he silenced Nimrud in a debate using his intelligence and his mind, and Nimrud wanted to murder Prophet Ibrahim. So he built a fire that became so strong that Nimrud could not even approach it. The fire was so intense that even the birds that flew above the flames would get burned and die. Allahu Akbar. Now this posed a problem since they wouldn't be able to throw Prophet Ibrahim into the fire, which was the original plan. So at that the blasphemers, they built a catapult as was suggested by Satan, and they tied Prophet Ibrahim, his hands and his feet, and they launched him into the immense fire. Now in regular circumstances, brothers and sisters, this would kill a human being without failure. However, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, he remained in that fire alive and well for many days. The fire was cool and peaceful and did not burn him or his clothes. However, the ropes that tied his hands and feet were burned, freeing Prophet Ibrahim, and he walked out of the fire unscathed. Now this is definitely an extraordinary matter that cannot be explained by natural law. The second condition states that this extraordinary matter must occur with someone who specifically claims prophethood. Right, so this person must claim prophethood. So if an extraordinary matter occurs from someone who claims to be God, then that extraordinary matter is not considered a miracle, because this person is claiming godhood and he's not claiming to be a prophet. So for example, the things that will happen in the future at the hands of the one-eyed impostor Dajjal, because what's going to occur is that he's going to order the rain to pour down, and the rain is going to comply, and it's going to pour down in that area that he ordered. And he's going to order a piece of land to sprout its plants, and the land will immediately comply. So now these things are not considered miracles. Why? even though they are extraordinaries, but they are not miracles because this person claims to be God and he doesn't claim to be a prophet. So the second condition has not been satisfied. And also the extraordinary matters that may occur from pious Muslims are not considered miracles. Right? They're not considered miracles because these pious Muslims are not claiming prophethood. Even though there might occur extraordinary matters and strange things from them, but they do not claim to be prophet. Right? And these things are considered to be, and they're called karama. Right? They're called karamat in plural. An example of a karama is what took place with the two companions, as was mentioned in Al-Bukhari, that once they left the session of the Prophet ﷺ after the sun had set. So on their way, one of their staffs began to illuminate, which guided them along the dark path. MashaAllah. The staff began to illuminate. Now, when they began to separate, they had to go to different routes. The staff of the second companion also began to light up as well. MashaAllah. So those extraordinary matters are considered to be karamat for those pious Muslims. And interestingly, MashaAllah, these karamat are considered to be miracles for the Prophet that they follow. And this is because had the pious person not followed their Prophet correctly, then this extraordinary matter would not have happened. MashaAllah. And the third condition states that the extraordinary matter must be in favor of the one who claimed prophethood. And this means that it must validate the call of that person. So if that extraordinary matter does not corroborate their claim, this would shame them and defame that individual. And it does not satisfy this condition, and hence it is not a miracle. An example of this is during the life of the Prophet ﷺ, there was a man named Musaylimah, and he falsely claimed to be a prophet. When Prophet Muhammad ﷺ performed a miracle, Musaylimah had a tendency to try to perform the same act. Now once the Prophet ﷺ, he cured a companion whose eye popped out and was left dangling on his cheek. The Prophet ﷺ inserted that dangling eyeball back into the companion's eye socket and wiped his blessed hand over that area, and this companion was cured instantly. Now Musaylimah attempted to do something similar to that. He attempted to do something similar to what the Prophet had performed. A person who was blind in one eye came to Musaylimah so that his blindness would be cured, but when Musaylimah wiped over that person's eye, the second eye went blind. Allahu Akbar. The second eye went blind. In another scenario, Musaylimah heard that the Prophet ﷺ, he would wipe the heads of children with his hand, right, for them to receive the blessings. Now when Musaylimah heard this, he tried to do the same thing with some of the children. But what happened was that when he wiped on their heads, their hair fell out. So he wiped on their heads and their hair fell out. Now what occurred with Musaylimah was extraordinary, and it did occur from someone who claimed to be a prophet. However, it was not in his favor. Right? It did not prove that he was truthful. The only thing that it proved was that he was an unintelligent, perpetual liar. And now the fourth condition states that the extraordinary matter cannot be challenged by someone else with a similar act. Right? So it cannot be challenged by someone else who performs a similar act. So if someone claims to be a prophet and he performs an extraordinary act, but those who oppose him can do the same act, then this person is not a prophet, and what they did was not a miracle. And this is the difference between sorcery and miracles. Sorcerers face off one-on-one with each other to see who is more skilled at sorcery. But a sorcerer stands no chance against the miracle of a prophet. May Allah raise their ranks. And a great example of this is what occurred with Prophet Musa alayhi salam and Pharaoh. So Pharaoh, he gathered a group of sorcerers to compete with Prophet Musa alayhi salam, because Pharaoh thought that Prophet Musa was a sorcerer. Right? This is what he thought. He claimed him to be a sorcerer. But he was in actuality a prophet. And Prophet Musa alayhi salam, he was supported with miracles. What he brought was miracles, and it was not sorcery. So after the sorcerers threw some of the ropes on their floor and made the audience think that what they were seeing were snakes moving around, Prophet Musa alayhi salam, he threw his staff on the ground and it turned into a real large snake that swallowed up all of the ropes and then returned back to its original state. And at that, the sorcerers knew that what they were seeing, what they were witnessing was not sorcery, because they were unable to match that act. This is why all of those sorcerers conceded and they immediately embraced Islam. MashaAllah. And Allah said about those sorcerers,
وَأُلْقِيَ السَّحَرَةُ سَاجِدِينَ.
that they threw themselves in sujood. MashaAllah. The word ulqiya was used, and this means to throw. So it was as if they threw themselves in sujood when they seen the miracle of Prophet Musa alayhi salam, and they realized that this was not sorcery and it was actually a miracle. So when they saw this and they knew that he was a true prophet and what he was telling was truth and was correct, they threw themselves in sujood, in submission. And they said, that they believed in Allah, Lord of the worlds, Lord of Musa and Harun. And then Fir'aun said to them,
قال فرعون آمنتم به قبل أن آذن لكم إن هذا لمكر مكرتموه في المدينة لتخرجوا منها أهلها فسوف تعلمون.
So he told his sorcerers, have you believed in Musa and I haven't given you permission to believe in him? Subhanallah, as if they need permission to embrace Islam. But that's what he told them. He said, have you believed in Musa and I haven't given you permission? And without my permission you believe in him? Subhanallah. Then he said to them, this is a conspiracy that you have plotted with Musa. This is a conspiracy that you have plotted with Musa. Allahu Akbar. And then Fir'aun threatened his sorcerers and he said to them,
لأقطعن أيديكم وأرجلكم من خلاف ثم لأصلبنكم أجمعين.
He said to them, I'm going to cut off your hands and your feet from opposite sides, and then I'm going to crucify all of you. Subhanallah. Then they responded to Fir'aun and they told him, So they told him, we all belong to Allah and to Him we shall return. And this includes you, Fir'aun. And this is true, we all belong to Allah and we all shall return to Him. And of course this shouldn't be taken literally because Allah is not attributed with a direction. He exists without a place. So they did not fear death after that. And they told him, do as you please. And they told him also,
وَمَا تَنْقِمُ مِنَّا إِلَّا أَنْ آمَنَّا بِآيَاتِ رَبِّنَا لَمَّا جَاءَتْنَا رَبَّنَا أَفْرِغْ عَلَيْنَا صَبْرًا وَتَوَفَّنَا مُسْلِمِينَ.
And they said to him, do you only hate us and resent us because we believed in these clear proofs? Is this the reason? And this is what they're telling him. They're saying, we've seen these clear proofs and we believed in them, and is this the only reason why you're going to punish us and torture us? Is this why you're doing this? And then they said, رَبَّنَا أَفْرِغْ عَلَيْنَا صَبْرًا. O Allah, O Allah, O our Lord, pour upon us patience, grant us patience, and let us die as Muslims. MashaAllah. What a beautiful response. And now that concludes what we wanted to mention about the definition of a miracle, and insha'Allah ta'ala we will continue to the next portion of this lesson, which is to mention the miracles of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And these miracles are extremely beautiful. You will enjoy them insha'Allah. And I tell you from now, we're going to mention over 30 different miracles insha'Allah, if Allah ta'ala permits. So we have over 30 different miracles, and we will start with the first one, and that is the Quran. And the Hafiz al-Iraqi, he mentioned this miracle in a line of poetry, and he said, أعظمها معجزة القرآن تبقى على تعاقب الأزمان. And this means that the greatest miracle that the Prophet had was the Quran. تبقى على تعاقب الأزمان. And this miracle will remain continuously through time. MashaAllah. So the Prophet had over 3,000 miracles, and this miracle still remains with us. The miracle of the Quran. All of the other miracles have passed, but the Quran is the lasting miracle. For example, the famous miracle where the water sprung out from between the fingers of the Prophet ﷺ, it no longer exists. But the miracle of the Quran can still be listened to, recited, memorized today. And the books of the other prophets, unfortunately, have been tampered with. So what you see today from the Bible, the Torah, the Psalms, are not authentic and contain major errors. As for the Quran, Allah promised that it will be protected from perversion and alteration. He said, "Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikr wa inna lahu lahafidhun," which means, verily we have sent down the Quran and verily we will protect it. Now when we talk about how the Quran is a miracle, there's a term that we should know, and that term is i'jazul Quran. I'jazul Quran, from the word a'jaza. A'jaza yu'jizu i'jazan. So this term is i'jazul Quran. And it is in reference to how the Quran was a miracle. I'jazul Quran, how the Quran was a miracle. Linguistically, the word i'jaz and mu'jiza also come from the derivative, from the root letters Ain, Jim, and Zay. And these letters which carry the meaning associated with being weak or powerless or unable. So if you were to ask, how do these meanings have anything to do with miracles? The answer to that is that a miracle disables its opponents from discrediting it. And there were many scholars who authored about I'jazul Quran, how the Quran is considered to be a miracle. The different ways the Quran is considered to be a miracle. Among these scholars is Al-Khattabi, also Al-Rammani, and also Al-Zamalkani, and also the great author in Tafsir Al-Razi, and also Ibn Suraqah, and also Al-Qadi Abu Bakr Al-Baqillani. Yes, he also authored in the topic I'jazul Quran. And Ibn al-Arabi said that the best of these authored books belongs to Imam Al-Baqillani. MashaAllah. And the miracles are divided into two categories, okay, brothers and sisters, two categories. Their miracles are either considered hissiyya or aqliyya. Hissiyya means something that is sensed, right? For example, the miracle when the moon split, right? The people saw this, so they sensed it. They used their senses to realize that this is something extraordinary. So this is what we mean by hissiyya. And also, the other category is aqliyya. And this is a miracle that appeals to the mind. So it's not necessarily something that you sense with your senses like sight, but it's something that appeals to the mind. When you use your intelligence and your sound mind, you realize that this is a miracle. And the Quran is from the second category. It is considered a miracle that is aqliyah, because it appeals to the mind. MashaAllah. And most of the miracles of this nation are considered of the second category. They are considered aqliyah, because we are the last nation. Right? Because we are considered the last nation and that there's not going to be another nation after us. So we were specified with miracles of the second category, so that the people after will be guided by these miracles, just by using their intellect and by thinking about it. And thus more people will be guided by that. Contrary to the people of Banu Israel, for most of the miracles that occurred to them were hissiyah, were miracles that were witnessed and sensed. And when you talk about I'jazul Quran, how the Quran is considered a miracle, you'll find that many scholars found different ways to consider why they thought the Quran was a miracle. There are many different valid sayings to it, mashallah. And Ibn Suraqah said about this, that there are many different sayings about how the Quran is considered a miracle, and in reality all of these differences hasn't even reached 1/10 of what it really is, mashallah. So yes, you have a lot of different opinions to why the Quran is a miracle or how it's considered a miracle, but in reality, they haven't even touched the surface. And also Az-Zarkashi said that the I'jaz, how the Quran is considered a miracle, is in all of what was mentioned. It was all of what was mentioned, not only one thing separate, because you will find scholars will pinpoint one particular reason. They'll say the Quran is a miracle because of this, because of the high level of Arabic, for example, or for this or for that reason. So Az-Zarkashi said that the Quran is considered a miracle because of all of these matters, and you cannot point one thing out specifically, right? Because the Quran contained all of these things. So there's no need to single out one reason of why the Quran is considered a miracle when it contains all of these things. For example, some scholars said that the i'jaz of the Quran, that how the Quran is considered a miracle, is because it mentioned things that happened in the future. So it mentioned things in the future. So they said it's considered a miracle from this perspective. And some scholars said that it's considered a miracle because it mentioned stories from the past. And it mentioned these events in great detail. And some scholars said that the Quran is a miracle because of the balagha, because of the high eloquence and the level of the Arabic language that was used in the Quran. And some other scholars said that the ijaz is in the challenge, that the miracle is in the challenge, when it challenged the Arabs at that time to produce something similar to it, and they were not able to do it. So some scholars said that the Quran is a miracle in this context. And I remind you earlier of what Az-Zarkashi said, that we do not specify one particular reason. Right? The Quran contained all of these different reasons, so we say that the Quran is a miracle, taking consideration all of them, and not only pinpointing one. MashaAllah. So when they were not able to accept the challenge and to bring something, a verse like the Quran, they decided to use the sword. They decided to go to battle, to fighting, to using weapons in order to stop the Prophet ﷺ. It would have been easier for them to just make a verse if they were able to. But because they knew they were not able to and that they would not be able to in the future, they decided to use weapons and to use fighting against the Prophet ﷺ. And there was nothing that they could do to discredit the Quran. There was nothing they could do. They called the Prophet ﷺ a poet. They called him a sorcerer, a magician. They said what he was saying was asatirul awwaleen, and this is like fairy tales. Right? They called the revelation of the Prophet ﷺ fairy tales. So they resulted and they went also to mocking and to lying about the Prophet ﷺ, but they could not discredit the Quran and they could not discredit the Prophet ﷺ. And when you think about it, brothers and sisters, was it not mentioned in the Quran about Abu Lahab, sayasla naran dhat lahab, that he is going to burn in a blazing flame? And this verse was revealed in his time when he was alive and he knew about it and he got upset about it and his wife got upset about it when it was revealed. Subhanallah. All Abu Lahab had to do was to embrace Islam, to discredit and to prove their point. But even this they could not do. Even this they could not do. Subhanallah. فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا وَلَن تَفْعَلُوا, that you were not able to discredit the Quran and you will not be able to discredit the Quran. Subhanallah. Tabarakallah. And you know what, brothers and sisters? They knew that what the Prophet ﷺ was saying was haqq, was truth. And they knew it was revelation. But they were arrogant and they did not want to accept. Subhanallah. They say in Arabic, Al-hawa yu'mi wa yusim, that following your desires makes you deaf and blind. And these people, they were deaf and blind even though they knew and they realized that what the Prophet ﷺ was saying was truth, but they could not accept. They could not accept, subhanallah. And there was a story that occurred to Walid ibn al-Mughira. And this is the father of Khalid ibn Walid. So once Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira heard the Prophet ﷺ reciting the Quran. And he was moved by the Quran and he was touched and he was affected positively. Subhanallah. Then this reached Abu Jahl. So Abu Jahl realized and heard of what was going on. So Abu Jahl went to Al-Walid and he told them that Quraysh has gathered money for you. So he's trying to keep Al-Walid on their side. And Al-Walid told them, I am from the wealthiest people of Quraysh from you. What he meant by this is, I do not need your money. So Abu Jahl told him, then tell us something that we can say about Muhammad that will convince the people that you are still on our side. So then listen to the response, brothers and sisters, of Al-Walid. Listen to what he said to Abu Jahl. He told him, وَمَاذَا أَقُولُ, and what do you want me to say about it? فَوَاللَّهِ مَا فِيكُمْ رَجُلٌ أَعْلَمُ بِالشِّعْرِ مِنِّي وَلَا بِرَجَزِهِ وَلَا بِقَصِيدِهِ وَلَا بِأَشْعَارِ الْجِنِّ, that there is no one who is more knowledgeable about poetry and the different types of poetry, including the poetry of the jinn, than me. And he meant by this is that I am the most knowledgeable about this field of knowledge than anybody else. وَاللَّهِ مَا يُشْبِهُ الَّذِي يَقُولُ شَيْئًا مِنْ هَذَا, and I swear by Allah that what the Prophet recites or what Muhammad recites does not resemble any of these things. وَاللَّهِ إِنَّ لَقَوْلَهُ الَّذِي يَقُولُ لَحَلَاوَةً, I swear by Allah, what he says has a sweetness to it. وَإِنَّ عَلَيْهِ لَطَلَاوَةً, and it has a beauty to it. وَإِنَّهُ لَمُثْمِرٌ أَعْلَاهُ مُغْدِقٌ أَسْفَلُهُ, the highest part of it is fruitful and the lowest part of it is gushing forth with bounty. And this is just eloquence in his part, where he's basically saying that the Quran, all of it has beauty and it has a certain eloquence and something that cannot be incomparable from the beginning of it till the end. And he said, وَإِنَّهُ لَيَعْلُو وَلَا يُعْلَى عَلَيْهِ, and it dominates and it cannot be dominated. وَإِنَّهُ لَيُحَطِّمُ مَا تَحْتَهُ, and it crushes all that is under it. So Abu Jahl told him, لَا يَرْضَى عَنْكَ قَوْمُكَ حَتَّى تَقُولَ فِيهِ, that your tribe, your people will not accept this from you to say this until you say something dispraising Muhammad. So then Al-Walid said, leave me alone, let me think about this. So give me some time to think about something that we can say about Muhammad. So then he came back and he said, okay, we'll say about Muhammad that he practices sihrun yu'thar, that he practices magic that makes people inclined to what he is saying. Subhanallah. So you can see, brothers and sisters, that these people knew that Muhammad was a prophet and that he was given revelation and that the Quran was truth and that it could not be imitated and it could not be discredited, but they could not act upon the knowledge that they had. They could not act upon it, subhanallah. And there were many instances similar to this, and it would have taken us a long time if we wanted to mention all of them, subhanallah. But know that they knew that the Prophet ﷺ was speaking the truth. And the second miracle that we want to mention is the splitting of the moon. وَهَذَا لَا يَخْفَى عَلَيْكُمْ, and this is something many of you have already heard. And it was mentioned in the Quran, and it was also mentioned in the two Sahih, in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. It was mentioned in the Quran in Surah Al-Qamar, the first verse. اقتربت الساعة وانشق القمر. The hour has come near, meaning the day of judgment is near, and the moon has split. And from the signs that the day of judgment is near is the splitting of the moon. MashaAllah. وَإِن يَرَوْا آيَةً يُعْرِضُوا وَيَقُولُوا سِحْرٌ مُسْتَمِرٌ. And if they see this miracle, they turn away and they say, this is strong magic or magic that will fade. And this is what the people of Mecca said about the Prophet ﷺ when they saw the moon split. They actually saw the moon split, brothers and sisters, and they did not believe. And they said that what they were seeing was magic. To the point that even the people outside of the city saw the moon split into two halves, and they still did not believe. And they said the magic of Muhammad is strong, subhanallah. They seen the moon split. And the way it split is that it split into two halves, it separated, it went down until one half went lower than the other, and then it went back up until they were equal in height, and then it went back together. And that's how the moon split, and yet they did not believe, subhanallah. May Allah, subhanallah, what can you say about that, ya ahbabana? What can you say about that? Seeing a miracle like the moon split and still not believing, subhanallah. And you might have someone who is skeptical and they might say, okay, if the moon split, why didn't the whole world see it? There are people out there, they might say, okay, if the moon split and you Muslims say that the moon split, so why didn't the whole world see it? And the answer to that, ya ahbabana, is very simple. It's very simple. And it is the fact that it can be cloudy. Right? Just because it's a clear night in one part of the world doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a clear night in Japan or the Middle East or North America. Right? We have different weather conditions. So the answer to that is that it's possible for it to be cloudy in those areas. And had those people saw it, had the whole world saw the miracle of the Prophet ﷺ, then this is something that would have reached us by tawatur. Because people, when they see something strange of this nature, something amazing, they spread it. Right? Subhanallah. So the answer to that is simple, that it's possible for it to be cloudy in certain areas. And yes, brothers and sisters, the splitting of the moon is an indication that the day of judgment is near. It is from the signs of the day of judgment. Subhanallah. And this happened over many years ago, over 1400 years ago. Subhanallah, this incident occurred. And look where we are now. So you can try to imagine how close the day of judgment is. Subhanallah. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said in another hadith, بُعِثْتُ أَنَا وَالسَّاعَةَ كَهَاتَيْنِ, and he lifted up his hand and he brought his middle finger and his index finger together. So what this hadith means is that he said, I was sent and the day of judgment is like this. And the occurrence of the day of judgment is like this. So he lifted up his hand and he brought his index finger and his middle finger and he put them together. So over here the Prophet ﷺ is indicating that the day of judgment is extremely near and it is approaching quickly. Subhanallah. So we need to prepare, ya ahbabana, we need to prepare. And the third miracle that we want to mention is that Allah enabled the Prophet ﷺ to see the countries from the east to the west. The Prophet saw this whole area as if it was in front of him. Allahu Akbar. And then he said, Inna mulka ummati satablughu ma zuwiya li minha. And this means my nation will reach these lands. And his nation did reach these lands, mashallah. It did come true. Islam did spread from the east to the west. And you will notice, brothers and sisters, that the east and west were specified because that is where the da'wah reached. MashaAllah. contrary to the north and the south. The north and the south for the da'wah didn't reach those areas like it did for the east and the west. And when you look at the Muslim nation, you will notice that they are the strongest in the east and the west. MashaAllah. And the fourth miracle is when the tree cried and wept because it longed for the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ, he used to give khutbah leaning on a dead tree stump. And then somebody offered to build a minbar for the Prophet ﷺ, and he accepted. So they built a minbar which consisted of about 3 steps, and he would give his khutbah, his speeches on that new minbar. And then what happened was that this tree, which was no longer touching the hand of this blessed Prophet ﷺ, it began to cry and it began to weep because it missed the Prophet ﷺ. And this miracle is among the greatest miracles of the Prophet ﷺ. And this miracle was mentioned by Imam al-Bukhari. And the scholars of Islam said that this miracle is greater than the miracle that occurred to Prophet Isa ﷺ, in which he revived the dead. And the reason, because reviving the dead entails giving life back to a person that used to be alive. As for giving life to a tree, this is something which is not normal. Subhanallah. Usually a tree is not attributed with haya, it is not attributed with life. Subhanallah. So for this reason, the scholars of Islam said that this miracle where life was given to this tree is greater than the miracle that occurred to Prophet Isa ﷺ when he revived the dead. And of course, both miracles are, MashaAllah, they're both amazing, right? But this one is considered greater. Allahu Akbar. And I would like to point out that yes, this tree was given life, it was given hayat, but it was without a ruh, without a soul, right? So this tree did come to life, but it was alive without a soul. We do not say this tree was given a ruh, a soul, like the humans have, for example. MashaAllah. And the fifth miracle is when the water began to gush out of the Prophet's hands, alayhi salatu wassalam. And Ibn Abdul Salam said that this miracle did not happen to any of the other prophets. That this was specific to our Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam. And this miracle occurred in the area called Hudaybiyah. Hudaybiyah, MashaAllah. And what happened was that the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, he was making wudu, and the people came to him, the army came to the Prophet alayhi salam, and they told him that the only water that they had was the water that was in front of the Prophet ﷺ that he was using. So the Prophet put his blessed hand into the bucket and it began to gush. Water began to gush out of the Prophet ﷺ's hand, and they used it for their wudu, they used it for their shower, they used it for whatever they needed. MashaAllah. And the one who was narrating this hadith, he was asked, how many were you? How many were you? And he said, Wallahi, had we been 100,000, it would have been enough, but we were 1,500. MashaAllah. So this is to the extent that the water came out of the Prophet's hand, alayhi salam. And the sixth miracle is that when the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, once he was holding food, and the food began to make tasbih in his blessed hand. MashaAllah. And this miracle was mentioned by Ibn Asakir. And the seventh miracle is similar, is that the Prophet ﷺ, he had stones, he was holding stones, and these stones also began to make tasbih in his hand. And what we mean by tasbih is saying Subhanallah. So you can imagine, brothers and sisters, the food and the stone verbally, MashaAllah, verbally saying Subhanallah, Subhanallah in the hands of the Prophet ﷺ, in between the fingers and hands of the best creation, the best man ever. MashaAllah. And the seventh miracle about the stones was narrated by Al-Bukhari from the route of Ibn Mas'ud. And the eighth miracle is that, listen to this, brothers and sisters, MashaAllah. The eighth miracle is that when the Prophet ﷺ, once he was traveling, and every tree and every stone that he passed by would say, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulallah. Allahu Akbar. Every tree and every stone would say salam to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahu Akbar. Imagine that, brothers and sisters. Even these lifeless objects, brothers and sisters, recognize the merit and the greatness of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Subhanallah. And nowadays we have many Muslims who, when the Prophet's name is mentioned, as if it's nothing. And many people nowadays, they don't even know where the Prophet is born or where he was buried or any of that. There was actually once a sister I was teaching, and I asked her a question. I had a picture of the Green Dome, and I said, who's buried here? Or whose masjid is this? You know, it was a very clear, obvious picture of the green dome. And this person, subhanallah, she did not know. She didn't know who this masjid belonged to, subhanallah. And she was a smart individual. She was a civil engineer, but she did not know much of the religion. Right? She did not learn much of the religion. And her parents really didn't enforce it on her. And she was actually sad. And she told me that she told her parents, Barakallahu feekum, may Allah reward you. Thank you for everything that you've done for me. You raised me and you guided me and you paid for my education and you helped me. But you didn't do anything for me in my religion. You didn't guide me towards learning the religion, the obligatory knowledge in the religion. And she was sad from this point, subhanallah. And we have many families who are like this, brothers and sisters. They emphasize learning the knowledge of the dunya, which is beneficial. But at the same time, we cannot neglect learning the obligatory knowledge or learning about our religion, Islamic knowledge, about learning the Prophet ﷺ, trying to increase our love for him. And how can we increase our love to the Prophet if we know nothing about him? Subhanallah. And the ninth miracle is what occurred when the Prophet ﷺ, he was eating, and the poisoned food spoke to him and informed him that it was poisoned. And this was mentioned by Imam al-Bukhari. And when the Prophet ﷺ, when he ate it and then he spit it out, he said, إِنَّهُ يُخْبِرُنِي أَنَّهُ مَسْمُومٌ, that this food is telling me that it is poisoned. Subhanallah. And it was the case. And it was actually a companion near him named Bishr who ate from the same food. He ate this poisoned food and he died instantly. Subhanallah. And the Prophet ﷺ did not die. So this is a mu'jiza. This is among the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ, that he ate this poison food and he did not die. MashaAllah, he did not die instantly from it. And the next miracle is the 10th, and this is when the camel came to the Prophet ﷺ and began to make some sounds, and the Prophet understood what the camel was saying, subhanallah. And it was actually crying. It came to the Prophet crying, subhanallah. The Prophet, when he entered this bustan, this garden, this area, the camel saw the Prophet and he recognized that the Prophet can help him, subhanallah. And it went directly to the Prophet because it knows that the Prophet ﷺ can console it and it can protect it, subhanallah. If there's anyone who's going to protect you, it's going to be the Prophet ﷺ. So he went to the Prophet, this camel went to the Prophet complaining, crying about its owner. And it was complaining that its owner was overworking it and it was not giving it enough to eat. So the Prophet ﷺ asked who its owner was. The owner came and the Prophet told him that this camel is telling him that you are overworking it and you are not giving it enough to eat. So be good to it. Subhanallah. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And this miracle was narrated by Abu Dawood from the route of Ibn Ja'far. And the 11th miracle is when the wolf spoke and informed the shepherd of the emergence of the Arab Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. What occurred was that there was a shepherd, his name was Uhban ibn Aus. So one day this Uhban, he took his flock to graze near the city of Medina. And the flock spread out and began to eat and began to graze while he was sitting, watching them, supervising them, guarding them from the predators. And all of a sudden a big wolf attacked one of the sheep. So the sheep let out a sound that caught Uhban's attention, and he quickly went after the wolf, waving his stick. The wolf ran away and he let go of the sheep, and the sheep returned to its flock. And then the wolf began to look at Uhman, upset. And all of a sudden something strange happened, subhanallah. The wolf began to speak and it said, Ya Abdullah, tahulu bayni wa bayna rizqin saqahu Allahu ilayya, which means, oh slave of Allah, do you try to come between me and the sustenance that Allah has provided for me? Subhanallah. Uhban's eyes lit up and he was extremely shocked and surprised. And he said, Wa ajabah, dhi'bun yatakallam, which means, oh, how strange this is, a speaking wolf. And then the wolf began to speak again, and it said in eloquent Arabic, أتعجب من هذا ورسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بين هذه النخلات يحدث الناس ببعض ما كان وما يكون ويدعوهم إلى عبادة الله وحده ومنهم من لا يجيبه. Subhanallah. And this means, you are surprised from this, and the Prophet of Allah, peace be upon him, is in the city between these palms. And the wolf actually pointed to the city of Medina with its head. And it continued to say, the Prophet tells the people about some of the things that has happened and some of the things that will happen in the future. He calls them to worship Allah alone, but some of them do not follow him. Uhban became curious by this and he was intrigued. And he began to wonder about what the wolf said to him. about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he gathered his flock and he went to the city of Medina. He put his animals in a stable and then he went to see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He went searching for the Prophet and he asked about where the Prophet was, and he was led to him. And then Uhban entered the house of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He sat down with the Prophet, he spoke to him, he told him about what happened with him and the speaking wolf. And the Prophet was very happy to hear what happened to him, mashallah. And then the Prophet alayhi salam taught Uhban about Islam, and Uhban eventually embraced Islam, mashallah, happily. So he embraced Islam and he said the Shahada and he became a Muslim. And then the Prophet told Uhban to convey to the people what happened to him, mashallah. So Uhban went around and he started telling the people about the story that happened to him with the speaking wolf. And they would say, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Alhamdulillah. And ever since then, Uhban became known as Mukallimu Dhib, the one who speaks with the wolf. MashaAllah, what a beautiful story. Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Alhamdulillah. Praise be to Allah, the one who endowed upon the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam many beautiful miracles. And this miracle is mentioned by At-Tabarani and Abu Nu'aym. The 12th miracle is what occurred once when the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam needed to use the washroom, but he could not find anything to use as a cover. So he ordered two small bushes which were far apart from one another to come together and to come to him. So they converged and they approached the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, mashallah. And then after he was done, he ordered them to return and they returned. And this miracle was mentioned by Imam Ahmad, At-Tabarani and Al-Bayhaqi. May Allah raise their ranks. And the 13th miracle is what occurred when 6 camels that were to be slaughtered by the Prophet ﷺ, they raced and they rushed and they competed with one another in order to be the first to be slaughtered by the Prophet ﷺ. MashaAllah. And usually animals do not compete and rush to get slaughtered. But because these camels recognized that who this man was, that he was the greatest man ever and that he was the Prophet of Allah, the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam, they rushed to be the first to be slaughtered by his blessed hands. MashaAllah. And this miracle was narrated and mentioned by Abu Dawood and An-Nasa'i. The 14th miracle is when the eye of Qatada ibn Nu'man fell during the battle of Uhud, and the Prophet ﷺ returned it to its eye socket. Subhanallah. And eventually that eye would be sharper than the other eye. And if the other eye got pink eye, that eye would not get it. MashaAllah. And this miracle was narrated by Al-Hakim. And the 15th miracle is during the battle of Khaybar, Imam Ali got pink eye. So the Prophet ﷺ lightly spit in it and it was cured instantly. MashaAllah. And this miracle was narrated by Al-Bukhari and Muslim. And the 16th miracle is when Abdullah ibn Aqiq injured his leg when he was coming down from the stairs of Abi Rafi ibn Abil Huqayq. So the Prophet ﷺ, he wiped on it with his 2 hands and it was cured. MashaAllah. And this was narrated by Al-Bukhari. The 17th miracle is what happened to Ubay ibn Khalaf. That once he said to the Prophet ﷺ that he was going to kill the Prophet. And the Prophet ﷺ responded, Bal ana aqtuluka insha'Allah. Rather, I am going to kill you insha'Allah. And during the battle of Uhud, the Prophet ﷺ hit Ubay. Even though it was a blow that would not usually kill a person, Ubay was scared and he said, Muhammad has killed me. Muhammad has killed me. That's what he said. The people around him told him that this was nothing to worry about. And Ubay told him that Muhammad said he was going to kill me. Had he spit on me, it would kill me. Subhanallah. And Ubay would eventually die because of that blow. So what the Prophet ﷺ said came true. Allahu Akbar. The 18th miracle is something similar when the Prophet ﷺ informed Umayyah ibn Khalaf that he was going to kill him. And this came true. The Prophet ﷺ killed him and he was killed in the battle of Badr. And this was narrated by Al-Bukhari. And the 19th miracle is when the Prophet ﷺ informed the companions exactly where they were going to die in the battle of Badr. Subhanallah. So before the battle of Badr occurred, he went to the area, the battlefield, and he put his hand on the ground and he would say, so-and-so is going to die over here. This is where so-and-so is going to die. Subhanallah. And they would die exactly where the Prophet ﷺ indicated. MashaAllah. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And this was narrated by Abu Dawood. And the 20th miracle is when he said, when the Prophet ﷺ said to Hassan ibn Ali that he was going to fix between two large armies. And it occurred just as the Prophet ﷺ mentioned. When his father Imam Ali died, the people they chose him as a Khalifa, but he stepped down later on to Muawiyah to prevent many Muslims from being killed. MashaAllah. And this was narrated by Al-Bukhari. And the 21st miracle is when the Prophet ﷺ foretold that Uthman was going to be killed. Uthman ibn Affan. It was narrated from Abu Musa that Uthman came and he asked permission to see the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet said, إِذَنْ لَهُ وَبَشِّرْهُ بِالْجَنَّةِ مَعَ بَلْوًا تُصِيبُهُ. Give him permission to enter and give him the glad tidings of paradise because of a calamity that's going to strike him. Subhanallah. And this was narrated by Al-Bukhari. And the 22nd miracle is that the Prophet ﷺ foretold the death of Al-Aswad Al-Ansi, that he was going to be killed that night. And news came later on, and he was killed the same night that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned. MashaAllah. And the 23rd miracle is when the Prophet ﷺ foretold of the death of Kisra. What happened was the Prophet ﷺ sent a letter to him calling him to Islam. When this letter reached Kisra, what did he do? He took it and he tore it apart. And when news reached the Prophet ﷺ of what Kisra did, the Prophet ﷺ said that Kisra died that night. And it turned out like he said. Subhanallah. And the way that he was killed, there's a moral and there's a lesson that we can benefit from it. Subhanallah. He was killed by his own son. He was killed by his own son. His son wanted his kingdom because he was a king and he had a lot of possessions. So he wanted his property, he wanted his kingdom. So his son killed him. So what happened before the father was killed? He wrote on a bottle, muqawwim. So he took a bottle and he wrote on it muqawwim. But he actually put poison in it. And muqawwim means something that's going to strengthen you. Right, so he knew maybe somebody's going to kill him. So what did he do as a safety measure? He took a bottle, put poison on it, and he wrote on the label that this is something good for you and something that's going to strengthen you. So when his son killed him, he took over the kingdom and he was in the room. When he saw that bottle, he thought it was good for him, so he drank it and he also was killed. Subhanallah. And the 24th miracle is when the Prophet ﷺ made dua for Anas ibn Malik to be wealthy and to have a lot of children. Anas lived 99 years and he had dates that would ripe twice a year and he had 120 children. MashaAllah. And the 25th miracle is when Utaybah spat on the Prophet, subhanallah. He actually spat on the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet made dua against him. And he made dua that an animal kills him, and he was actually killed by a lion, subhanallah. And this was narrated by Abu Nu'aym. And the 26th miracle is when the people complained to the Prophet ﷺ about a drought. So he made dua. And at that moment, there wasn't a cloud in the sky. And after he made the dua, clouds came and they began to rain consistently for multiple weeks. MashaAllah. And then the people complained. So first they were complaining that there wasn't enough rain. And then they began to complain that there was too much rain. Subhanallah. And they asked him to make dua for it to stop. So he did so and it stopped raining immediately. MashaAllah. MashaAllah. And this was narrated by Al-Bukhari and Muslim. And the 27th miracle is what occurred during the Battle of the Trench when he ﷺ fed 1,000 people from one container. MashaAllah. And this was narrated by Al-Bukhari and Muslim. And the 28th miracle is what occurred when the Prophet ﷺ ordered Umar ibn al-Khattab to equip 400 riders from dates that he had. And he equipped all of them, and it was as these dates did not decrease at all. Subhanallah. So you have 400 riders, brothers and sisters, and they would take what they needed, and at the end of it, when they took what they needed, it was as if the dates were still the same amount, as if it did not decrease at all. MashaAllah. And this was narrated by Imam Ahmad. And the 29th miracle is what occurred when the Prophet ﷺ fed 80 people from a small amount of wheat. Subhanallah. And at the end of it, it was as if this wheat had not been touched. Allahu Akbar. And this was narrated by Al-Bukhari and Muslim. And the 30th miracle is what occurred when an army ate from a plate of food until they were full. And there wasn't much left for Abu Hurairah. So the Prophet ﷺ made dua for it, and Abu Hurairah began to eat from it until he took what he needed, and he continued benefiting from it until the time of Uthman, until it was finally lost. So this mizwad, they call it, which is like a plate, the Prophet Abu Hurairah kept on benefiting from it and kept using it until after the time of Uthman. And it was even mentioned that Abu Hurairah said, I have been inflicted with 3 calamities: the death of the Prophet, the death of Uthman, and me losing the mizwad. Subhanallah. And the 31st miracle is what occurred when Zainab got married. He, the Prophet ﷺ, fed people. Of course, on this marriage, he fed people. And what happened is when the food was cleared, it was as if the food actually increased. MashaAllah. And usually this does not happen. And this was mentioned by Abu Nu'aym. And the 32nd miracle is what occurred in the battle of Hunayn, when the Prophet ﷺ, he threw dirt at the kuffar and they couldn't see. And they lost because of that. MashaAllah. And this was narrated by Muslim. And the 33rd miracle is what occurred when the kuffar plotted to kill the Prophet ﷺ, and they were waiting outside of his house. So the Prophet ﷺ, he came out and they could not even see him. And he even went to them and he put dirt on their heads. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And inshallah, brothers and sisters, we will stop here. We mentioned a few miracles, alhamdulillah, inshallah, he benefited from it. But remember, there are over 3,000 miracles of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Over 3,000. Alhamdulillah, we mentioned over 30, and hopefully you benefited from it, inshallah. Like I said, there are many more miracles. As-Suyuti mentioned that from the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ are the speaking of the babies and also the reviving of the dead. MashaAllah. So there are many miracles we have not mentioned, and there are probably a few that you probably heard that have not been mentioned here. So we do not mean to say that these are only the miracles that have been narrated. Of course not. MashaAllah. And I would have loved to elaborate on some of these miracles, but for the sake of time, we had to resort to cutting it short. Inshallah, hopefully, and maybe other lessons, bi'idhnillah, make dua for us. And you might find there are some different narrations for these different miracles, and that's fine, mashallah. Those are fine, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. May Allah bless your families and protect your families. I encourage you to continue supporting us by liking, by sharing, by commenting, even by donating, inshallah. And make dua for us, bi'idhnillah, that we can keep going strong and keep bringing you more initiatives, inshallah ta'ala. Barakallahu feekum. Ahsanallahu ilaykum. Subhanaka rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Wa salamun ala al-mursaleen. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you liked it, check out the rest of our series. And donate for the sake of Allah so that we may continue spreading the obligatory knowledge to Muslims all over the world. Barakallahu feekum. May Allah accept your deeds.